When I saw in the comments that someone was suggesting the fanfic Girls Scream Aloud, I thought I was in for a regular case of another deranged fanfic in which someone writes depraved pose about real life celebrities in a messed up situation. I instead fell down a rabbit hole in which a depraved story became part of a famous court case, all surrounding the legality of dark fanfiction and freedom of speech in the UK, especially regarding the internet in general. So without further ado, let's begin to dive into the story of the fanfic that went on trial. This is the story of Girls Scream Aloud. Now, for those not in the know, Girls Aloud are an extremely famous UK girl group who were actually created as part of a reality show called Pop Stars The Rivals. The group had huge success in the UK with hits such as The Sound of the Underground, Love Machine, and the ballad I'll Stand By You, which I'd kind of sing here, but I don't want YouTube to demonetize me. But either way, these songs are massive, and if you haven't heard them, give them a shout. They're pretty fun pop songs. So this group were massive throughout the 2000s, being named as Britain's best-selling girl group of the 21st century, with 4 million albums sold in the UK. With this, of course, though, the group were unavoidable during the time period. Like a lot of girl groups and you sort of pop bands from that point in time, everywhere you looked and everywhere you listened, these girls would be at the forefront, especially if you lived in the UK. And during the same time period as we explored in the Agony and Pink video, the internet was also rampant for alternative sex fiction websites, filled to the brim with wild stories of insane sexual fantasies and desires, sometimes being the original works, but most of the time featuring fictional characters or in rare cases, real celebrities. And this is where the website Kristen's Putrid Story Archive comes in. A wild name, I know, and a very funny one too. Which itself started as a repository for stories from a much older website called alt.sexstories, which is the same sort of large place that Agony and Pink ended up coming from. So what started out as an archive became its own, homebrew of weird, wild shit. And with this, we start on to the story itself, Girls Scream Aloud. So on this website, a writer who went by the pseudonym Blake Sinclair would write a story titled Girls Scream Aloud, which would go on to live in infamy. Now the story starts with a bunch of disclaimers. First to tell us that of course the story contains multiple offensive and triggering topics. So again, as with my sort of previous videos on dark subject matter, I'm going to give you guys a trigger warning as this story contains lots of essay and torture and sexual torture. So if you do find any of those topics triggering, or you just don't really want to engage with that sort of content, I would advise clicking off the video, or at least if you are going to proceed forward, proceed with heavy caution. This is some really sick stuff. So he goes on to tell us in his disclaimer that the story is set in a fictional world where essentially women have no rights and men can do whatever the fuck they want to them. And pretty much misogyny is whacked up to the nines in this universe, even more so than our own world, which makes it, is really saying something. It literally makes the world of a book like The Handmaid's Tale look tame, so that's what we're getting into with this kind of story. But our author reassures us this doesn't have anything to do with his own beliefs, and it doesn't reflect his beliefs in the slightest. And again, I don't want to judge too quickly, but all I can feel when I read that is, right, sure buddy, I'm sure this doesn't reflect you in any way. He then tells us not to recreate anything from the story in real life, and to practice safe sex, which just feels like it comes out of nowhere and really doesn't have anything to do with the story at hand, but okay. So while that may be good and all, that he's telling us to have safe sex with consenting adults, I just don't really understand, at the end of the day when you're writing a story like this, how the two are involved. Clearly this is your sick fantasy. I don't think we're trying to bring this into the real world, but hey-oh, let's go. The next disclaimer is that the characters in this story are fictitious, which just isn't true, is it, yeah, I get that technically the torturer character and some of the other characters are fake, but at the end of the day, it straight up features Girls Aloud who are real people, so I don't think you can put that in there. And I feel in general, having these warnings when you're oh yeah, don't do anything bad like this in real life and don't hurt real people, when you're writing a story that's this just gross. I get it's a fantasy, but I don't know, man. It's kind of one of those blurred lines, I feel like, when it comes to this stuff. We then get one last warning, telling us that if us as readers can't differentiate fiction and reality, we should kill ourselves. Yeah, I'm not joking. He literally tells you to commit suicide if you cannot tell the difference between reality and fiction. I would have just suggested, going to going to your doctor, seeking, mental help. But no, this guy says we should kill ourselves. And then finally, after all that bloody rigmarole, we finally get our story. So it starts off with a man who found the body parts of the girl group on eBay and decides to buy a leg of one of the members. The leg then arrives with a DVD of CCTV footage of the last moments of the group. The guy then rubs some weird balm on the leg, which apparently in this universe can preserve dead body parts, because this world is so messed up that instead of, with the technology to preserve, dead bodies, instead of using that science to do something good or maybe something nice for families, it's apparently used by deranged men to keep their victims' body parts in pristine condition. So already, lovely world building we've got here. He then puts on the DVD and our story goes into the true depths of depravity. The footage starts with an angry bus driver who's mad that Girls Aloud are having a super loud orgy with each other in the back of their tour bus, and instead of just ignoring it or doing anything else, he's apparently so mad about this that he decides to drop the gang off to a psycho killer. The psycho killer or the bus driver, I'm not really sure, then apparently implements some kind of horrific gas which knocks the, girl group out. What follows is 5 chapters going through this masked, big-donged killer murdering each of the girls in a slightly unique and grotesque way. Luckily, there isn't a huge amount of detail, and they aren't super long chapters, but still, they are really just extremely gross and full of multiple spelling/grammar errors and just vile misogynistic language overall. And again, it's just like, all the stuff that happens is just so gross, and obviously thinly layered misogyny with just weird rape fantasies and SA fantasies. It is just very gross to read. But again, as he said, it doesn't represent him. It doesn't represent him. We then cut back to our viewer who's happy with his leg. His 16-year-old sister then comes in, and she's turned on apparently by the leg and the whole kerfuffle. So naturally, after seeing her be aroused by this, he fantasizes about killing her in a similar way to what he just watched, before eventually going to do the deed as our fanfiction draws to a close, and thank fuck that story is finally over. Like I said earlier, this story is just a vile piece of crap, poorly written, filled with a lot of gross and sexist themes, and generally not really worth anything other than a pure oddity and curiosity that someone would write this about real people. But clearly the UK government didn't feel the same way as me, as this story would result in a court case that would be the last obscenity trial relating to the written word as of the writing of this script in 2025. The story was posted to the Kirsten site on July 16th, 2007, and it wasn't long before someone in journalism took notice, as on the 26th of July the same year, the Daily Star would write an article on the story, and in it they would not only trash the story, but also the host website too, with the paper reporting the website and its content to the Internet Watch Foundation. The Internet Watch Foundation found that the site was based in the US and ended up reporting it to Interpol, but as it was based in the US, the IWF would then respond to the Star saying that they were unable to deal with the case any further, as it was outside their scope of jurisdiction. But they would notify the UK police of the site due to the site containing works cited as child abuse fantasies by the organisation, hoping that in some way they could at least get the site taken down locally in the UK. British police would then investigate the site, and when investigating the site and the girl's Scream Aloud story in particular, they were then able to track down the author, as his email address was written at the top of the story, which was linked back to his real address, which was actually based in the UK, not the USA. After this, the British police took this one step further by getting Scotland fucking Yard on the case with their Obscene Publications Unit, who decided to take things even further and get the go-ahead from the UK's Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute the writer of the story. So on the 25th of September 2008, a year after the story's published date, Scotland Yard announced that 35-year-old civil servant Darren Walker was the writer of the story, and he would be prosecuted for the crime of online publication of material both the police and the Crown Prosecution Service declared obscene, which made a lot of people very worried about what this would mean for online publishing going forward. The internet was like the Wild West at this point, in both a good way and a bad way, and if Darren went to jail for his admittedly fucked up story, what would that mean for everybody else that wrote or created anything controversial online? And because of this, the case was looked at very intently by a lot of journalists, and even the public. On the one hand, the story concept and execution was absolutely awful and gross, especially for the real people it was based on. And again, I think that is a factor that even in a lot of these old articles is kind of not really talked about that much. These are real people. They have lives, they have family members and friends. And there's someone on the internet writing a story using them and putting them in horrific ways without, their own sanction and out their, ability to remove this kind of material. What does that mean, for them? It's kind of an awful thing that sadly there just isn't really anything done about even to this day. On the other hand, and again, very devil's advocate here, if you do arrest someone for writing a fictional story when they have committed no real world crimes, is that okay? I mean, it is that question of at the end of the day, is writing something fucked up equivalent to doing something fucked up? And again, in most cases, I think most logical and reasonable people say no. But obviously the issue being here is that it is about a real person. So it kind of is this blurred line of what is and isn't okay. And I think because of this, it was kind of this thing of, even if you disagree with the story or didn't like the story, which again, I think most people who were writing these kind of articles were coming from the place of, what does this mean going forward? Because if we say let the police go and we let the UK, court go, okay, anything like this is bad. Well, where do we draw the line, If someone writes an admittedly disturbing article about something real going on in the world, could that be, taken off the internet? If someone writes a disturbing story that is just their own fantasy story, could that then be taken off the internet? So while Darren's story was a bunch of crap, it had ramifications that would affect all of the UK and its internet usage and writing and journalism going forward. And again, issues like this, even in the modern era, can be confusing. So you can see why in 2008, when the internet was really starting to hit its stride in the sort of mainstream world, why it became such a big case. So Judgment Day would finally arrive, and Darren would appear in court on the 22nd of December 2008 to face charges for publishing an obscene article, and then was granted unconditional bail, with his case being set for trial on the 16th of March 2009. So all in all, a pretty uneventful beginning to this court procedure with just the basic stuff set up. Darren will report that in the time between the sentencing and the trial, he would end up losing his job as a civil servant, and realising the seriousness of this case during a hearing in January, would let the court know that he would be represented by a Queen's Counsel lawyer, which, for those not from the UK, is essentially a high-ranking lawyer given a title by the royal family, kind of similar to how, people that have made an impact in the UK get OBEs. It's kind of the same thing for a lawyer. So basically, they're the top of the top, the best lawyers that you can get. Following this, the Crown Prosecution Service would hire their own Queen Counsel lawyer to combat Darren, kind of being like, nah, you're not getting out of this one, buddy. This led to the trial getting even more attention from journalists. And with this change, the trial was pushed back to the 29th of June 2009 to accommodate these new lawyers. So, the trial was taking place nearly 2 years after this story was originally published. But eventually, the fateful day would come, and at the Newcastle Crown Court, the trial would begin. And end just about as quickly as it started. It turns out most of the reason this whole thing went to court, and the answer to the question why this specific fanfic was chosen, the Crown Prosecution Service argued that due to Girls Aloud mainly having a fan base of young girls, that these children would Google the group and somehow find Darren's story, and it would corrupt their young minds. Which, technically makes it fall under the requirements of a written article being deemed obscene according to our UK law. But obviously, anyone hearing that right now in the video can tell that that's very fucking stupid and clearly was never going to happen. So Darren's team ended up bringing in an IT expert who showed them that when they Googled Girls Aloud, the fanfic in question would never come up because there were millions of results, none of which had anything to do with Darren's story. So to find this story, you'd have to go through millions and millions of results. Not sure what qualified him there as an expert, because apparently all he seemed to do was do a Google search. But this is 2008, so I guess Scotland Yard didn't know what fucking Google was. But again, at the end of the day, I'm glad that he did show them the silliness and ridiculousness of their statement. I mean, again, obscenity in the UK has always been a weird when it comes to this idea of corrupting young minds, which again, most of the time is so odd because the stories and things that they are deeming obscene are so clearly meant for adults. But, that is at least, according to our law, the reason why things are obscene. And with that, the case was thrown at court and Darren was sentenced to not guilty, and even the Crown Prosecution themselves didn't seem to mind all that much. And with that, Darren would leave the court and make no comment to any reporters, and after that, Darren smartly went out of the spotlight. At the end of the day, he wrote his fucked up story. He managed to get off of being arrested and going to jail for God knows how long. He lost his job as a fucking, civil servant and just decided to nope out of there and just, I guess enjoy the privacy that at least comes with the early internet. John Sutherland, a professor of literary censorship, even remarked in a sort of short interview with The Guardian how bad the work was on a literary level and how unremarkable Darren's house was when it was investigated by the police. So, really was just a very, I guess, average guy that wrote something really fucked up. And after this, Darren never came back to the world of fan fiction, at least as far as I can tell. But, presumably because after a case like that, you're pretty shaken up, and you probably go, yeah, I managed to get off scot-free. I'm not testing those waters anymore. I put my foot in, and it went into the deep end. And even the OG story only exists for a snapshot on the Wayback Machine, which is wild considering its infamy. You thought someone would have kept it around. Now, I did find out more about Darren in them one day, but I don't feel like mentioning it here because this channel's meant to be an informative channel, at least when it comes to these fanfic videos. I want to discuss a weird fanfic, maybe talk about its themes or how odd it is and how its writing style is, and maybe look into an interesting story if the creator has done something messed up. I'm not here to hunt these people down. I'm not here to expose people. And, even if I do make fun of these stories, unless they've committed crimes like a certain other person that I've done a video on, I don't want to, just beat them while they're down. And, Darren seems to have moved on with his life. He seems to at least, he's moved on from the internet. He's not making weird stuff like this anymore. So I feel like we should just leave the guy alone. He made something fucked up and it is gross and weird. I don't like it. But I also don't think that warrants him being hunted down or attacked by internet trolls. So please don't seek out Darren. Leave the guy alone. He clearly already went to court over this shit. So I guess, going forward, just let the guy live in some kind of peace. But that does end the story of Girls Scream Aloud and how its wild court case shook the UK. So if you guys have any more interesting stories like this, make sure to comment them down below and I might consider them for a future video. So remember guys, if you like the video, remember to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel and see more videos like this one, and hit the bell notification so you get an update every time I upload a new video. I'm glad you guys are really liking this content, and I hope you all have a great weekend.